Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm open to your questions.
Mr. Putin, the recent convention of the United Russia Party made the political situation in the country much clearer. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a chance to discuss that with Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. Today, we wanted to ask you the questions which we believe are of interest to our fellow citizens. The first one was voiced both by your supporters and skeptics. Why are you returning to the Kremlin?
I am aware of the wave of questions and comments in this regard that appeared on the internet, in online and print media. And here's what I would like to say. As I've mentioned many times, and as first Russian President Boris Yeltsin said, I never aspired to this position. It's a well-known fact. Initially, when this offer was made, I explicitly expressed doubts over my ability to handle such a huge workload and enormous responsibility for the fate of the nation. But once I take up a job, I do my best to complete it, or at least to yield maximum results. But there are people who, as you mentioned, that criticize me and Dmitry Medvedev. They say that if your humble servant takes part in the election, that would mean that there would be no election at all. Perhaps that would be the case for them, but an ordinary citizen always has a choice to make. So our critics might see it their own way, but in this case they ought to present their platform, and what's more important, not only present it, but also to prove in practice that they can do this job better. There are others who say that we're in for a period of stagnation, similar to the time when Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev was in power. I do not want to sound too critical. There were indeed many achievements. But in fact, I do not recall any of the post-war Soviet leaders who would be as hard-working as myself or the incumbent president Dmitry Medvedev. I don't remember any.
They couldn't.
They couldn't, due to their physical condition and a lack of understanding of what needed to be done. They might well have done something, but they didn't have a clue or enough will for that. We can also refer to the experience of other countries. I didn't try to hold on to power, and you know it perfectly well. Although I could have easily taken advantage of the constitutional majority of the ruling United Russia Party to amend the constitution. But I stopped short of that. I didn't change the constitution to suit one man only, myself. I wanted people to see that there would be no tragedy in a natural change of power. Let's turn to other countries. Up to the end of the Second World War, the US didn't have any limits on the number of presidential terms.
Yes, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected 3 times.
4 times?
Prior to that, some US presidents ran for a 3rd time. But if I'm not mistaken, none of the attempts was successful, except for Franklin Roosevelt, who was elected president 4 times running. He stood at the helm throughout the ordeals of economic depression and the Second World War, and was elected 4 times because his policies were effective. But the exact number of terms and years in power do not really matter. Helmut Kohl spent 16 years in power in West Germany. He wasn't president, but his post was actually the most important executive job in the country. The same goes for one of the former Canadian prime ministers. Look at post-war France, where a president could have been elected for 7 years without a limit on the number of terms. It was just recently that France introduced amendments into its constitution and cut it down to no more than 2 5-year terms. Very similar to what we have in Russia. Now, what does that mean? When a country is facing difficult and hard times, when it's recovering from a crisis and getting back on its feet, it's these pillars of stability, including in politics, that play a vital role.
Mr. Putin, you talk a lot about stability, but stability has its negative sides, as it sometimes results in nationwide stagnation. How do you feel about the lack of staff rotation in the government? Some ministers have not only produced dubious results over their terms in office, what they produced was a series of failures. Do you think the fact they are still in office might be a sign of a standstill in the country?
Frequent reshuffles in the government are a sign of weakness. They indicate that officials are either incapable or unwilling to accept personal responsibility. They keep passing it around like a hot potato. You have to try everything you can to make an official work before you decide to dismiss him. One more thing. When we choose people for certain jobs, we always try to make a good, thought-out choice. It does not always work out perfectly, of course, and in these cases we are forced to let people go. This is true.
Still, the best way to avoid too much of a standstill in your staff policy is to get rid of some of your old allies who are no longer working efficiently. Your predecessors, Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin, they never hesitated to drop off the ballast. This is actually the reason why politicians, especially notable political figures, are always essentially alone. General de Gaulle and Winston Churchill spoke of this. Do you perhaps feel the need to let go of some of the people you've been working with in past years? Alternatively, will things go a different way, which is perhaps easier to envision in Russia, with current Kremlin residents moving to the White House and vice versa, resulting in no changes?
Their loneliness is not related to staff policy. It has nothing to do with appointments and reshuffles. It is there. But let me tell you what causes it. Prominent political figures cannot let anyone near themselves. They're not allowed to favour certain people over others. Their decisions cannot be based on personal sympathies. They have to be based on professional, impartial analysis and the will to take responsibility. At the same time, we cannot go to extremes. There has to be a degree of succession in power. We cannot start by playing games. We can't go and dismiss the parliament just because someone on television or some print journalist said we have to. That would not be serious. We have to look at the people who are making their third or fourth attempt to resolve problems they've been working on. And if they're tired but their performance was adequate, we have to find some other place where they can apply their efforts, talent and experience. Once their positions are open, we bring in new people with fresh ideas and motivation to implement them. This is what we're planning to do. We have a lot to learn from the great politicians you mentioned. They each had plenty of experience in politics. I would even say they were philosophers as well as politicians. De Gaulle had a lot of different sayings. He is one of my favourite figures in politics. You were professionally connected to France, so you might know this saying of his. Always choose the hardest way. You'll never find rivals there.
Mr. Putin, Western countries did not react strongly to your decision to run for president at the upcoming elections. They said it was Russia's internal affair and, as Angela Merkel put it, they were ready to work with any legitimately elected president. You must understand, however, that politically Western states consider you a hawk. How do you feel about that? And what is going to happen to the reset of Russian-US relations, which exists as an idea, but there is not many signs that it's working?
Well, the hawk is a good bird.
But you are certainly no dove.
I am a man and I do not like cliches. Our foreign policy in the past and today was thought out and aimed at creating a favourable environment for Russia's development. This means we want to have friendly relations with all of our partners. Naturally, we have and always will defend our national interests, but we have always been regardful of others when we did it, and we plan to maintain that in future.
Mr. Putin, you just mentioned the economy and the crisis. It looks like there is another storm brewing. Stock markets are tumbling and people say there is only so much the traders themselves can do about it. Emerging markets are losing capital. The same is true about Russia. I recently read an article that said the government needed a new program to counter the next crisis. A program that would be like a good skirt on a girl, short and offering an attractive perspective. Supposedly that would help win back businesses' trust and stop the crisis. Does your government have such a program?
You know, if we keep talking about the fall of stock market indexes, they might never recover. Russia will grow by 4% this year, which is satisfactory. China will grow by 9%, which is a good result. We have to push for 6 to 7% economic growth. We managed to deliver that in the pre-crisis years, and we will try to do it again, as I have said before. We will, of course, try to make our economy more open. There are fears, however, especially in the light of Russia's WTO accession, that opening it too much might harm it. Returning to your metaphor, a short skirt looks good on some women, while others are better off wearing something else.
A longer skirt?
Yes, other clothes. From that point of view, I believe we have managed to make ourselves safe from unpleasant surprises as we negotiated on Russia's WTO accession. Essentially, entire branches of Russia's economy are going through a long transition period. I will say it again, however. We only need make our final decision when all of the fail-safe clauses that we might need to protect our economic interests at one point or another are in place.
What would be a good percentage for United Russia in these elections?
You're trying to get a political forecast out of me.
I'm not asking for any numbers. I just asked you what result you would be satisfied with.
United Russia has to remain the leading political party in the country and the parliament. That would be a good result.
Thank you very much for this talk, Mr. Putin. I believe we are finished for today.
Thank you.